It's like a Star Wars movie made by someone who's never seen anything other than Star Wars. Most people agree when something has a soul versus not having one. For instance, everyone agrees that the Mandalorian and Grogu has no soul, while the original Star Wars does, but it's more of a subconscious thing. We aren't really applying logic or analysis to it. Well, I spent a bit of time thinking about it, and I think I distilled the criteria we subconsciously use when we say that something is ensouled, and I'm using Star Wars as a key example for reasons that I'll go over later. To start, we have to acknowledge a fundamental fact of writing, which is that there is nothing new under the sun. Every story that will ever be written has already been written. There are only so many paths a human can walk down, only so many permutations of reality that we can conceive of, and when it comes to writing, we generally tend to pull from two sources. 1. Reality, and 2. Fiction. The second thing is that there is a certain phenomenon that occurs if one is to repeatedly replicate an image. A photocopy of a photocopy, a picture of a screen, a print of a photo. With every new step it takes, it abstracts further until some point it becomes an amorphous blob, maybe black and white, with no ability to tell what the original was intended to look like. This is called generation loss, and this is something that applies not just to photographs, but to stories, and is something that can very easily lead to the death of one. For instance, an isekai anime is a copy of JRPGs, which themselves are a copy of Western fantasy, which are a copy of Tolkien, who himself copied many existing mythologies. The end result is that, were somebody to go into a modern isekai anime like That Time I Reincarnated as a Vending Machine, completely ignorant of any of this, the story would appear completely nonsensical. As time progresses, rather than evolving, some franchises or genres instead involute, which means to curl inward. They become increasingly complex, with more and more links to other aspects of the genre or franchise, but without any actual progress. Star Wars is perhaps the greatest example of this, because it not only has thematic involution, but timeline involution. We start off with the original trilogy, which is completely unburdened, then we have the prequels, which drop back some years, but after the sequels flopped, Disney got scared. The Mandalorian, Rogue One, Rebels, The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, they are all in-betweenquels, increasing complexity with the illusion of progress. And as a side note, if you find this idea interesting, please comment, like, and subscribe. I don't have enough fans for a Patreon or a Discord, so it's the only way to show your support at this juncture. On the thematic end, A New Hope was a standard hero's journey with elements from Dune, westerns, Akira Kurosawa's samurai films, and so on and so on and so on. At the heart of it, however, was something real, a Vietnam-era inspired story which took aim at the American Empire. Over the course of the next 5 movies directed by Lucas, this real-world anchoring of the Empire in American politics remained, and that was a core idea which kept the story anchored even as it pulled from so many other sources. By comparison, modern Star Wars, rather than talking about politics or America, is talking about Star Wars. The themes and commentary are about Star Wars itself. It's not anchored in reality anymore. The story of The Mandalorian Season 3 has nothing to do with reality. Instead, it's all about Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. Remember this? Here's what happened to that. There's nothing to ground this. There's no burgeoning relationship akin to a father and son. No story of a man escaping his religious cult. No story of how fascism rises when good people stay complacent. The story pays lip service to these ideas, but they aren't at the core of it. They're at the periphery. This lack of connection to reality damns the show even harder than its horrid pacing and weakening special effects. The originals don't hold up in any way on the special effects front, and yet they are still beloved, partially because of nostalgia, yes, but partially because of that soul which continues to resonate. The cure to this is simple. You can't just pull from fiction, you have to pull from real life to create some universal connection between your audience and your story that resonates with them. This resonance is what sticks with us during the reading. It's what we retain after we finish. It's how we're able to communicate through emotions. A white man who has never experienced racism can feel uncomfortable watching Get Out because of how the movie packages it into usual horror tropes. Those draw connections between the genre and the cultural experience of a black person. It's how a black man can form a connection with blue-eyed, blonde-haired ninja Naruto, who has the unfortunate circumstance of being surrounded by a society who wants what he has to offer without wanting him. Soul, these resonances with reality, are what connect works of fiction to people. Yes, the flashy lightsabers, the cool spaceships, and the cool-looking characters are why many originally fell in love with Star Wars, but if that was all it had to it, they would have grown out of it eventually. Going back to Mando and Grogu, the only real thing this movie has to offer is the roughly 5 minutes of Jabba's son struggling to become his own man. Dive in deeper to that. Draw parallels between his struggle to escape his legacy versus Mando's struggle to escape his religion, even though he really should have renounced the cult by now, but honestly that's a topic for another video. If they had structured the episode scripts around that, then it would have been much better. It'd at least have a character arc that some people can relate to. Nowadays, with Gen Z downwardly mobile, it's not crazy to say that Rada the Hutt's story could have possibly struck a chord with the audience that Star Wars needs most. I know it sounds crazy to say, but I'm being serious with this. People love to have characters they otherwise wouldn't care about turned into ones that they do care about. Just look at Andor. Perfect example of turning a literal who into a fleshed out, messy guy that we can root for. And speaking of which, Tony Gilroy, the showrunner for Andor, explains this phenomenon with the allegory of the toy box. He said something along the lines of, when you're working on IP storytelling, your impulse is to open the toy box and start playing with all the toys. You should try to resist that, and what you should do is to leave more toys in the toy box than were there when you got there, resisting the impulse to be a child and be more like a storyteller who's adding to the world rather than taking from it. Rather than just pulling from Star Wars, Gilroy pulled from real things, real history. There's whole articles talking about the specific historical moments he was inspired by when making certain arcs, settings, and characters. The costume designers moved slightly askew off the beaten Star Wars path to infuse the setting with their own flair inspired by fantasy outfits, steampunk, etc. Overall, I think the amount of props and outfits they generated alone has been a pretty large boon to the universe as a whole. What I'm saying essentially is that a man's mind is limited. Failing to realize the limitations of your own brain, not looking outwards for more inspiration, is how you end up with The Mandalorian Season 3 in the movie. I know that people like to blame Dave Filoni for this, but Jon Favreau actually has more writing credits than Filoni does on these latest entries in the Mando series, and that's something I just can't understand. The man made Elf, for crying out loud, Iron Man, too. And Chef wasn't half bad either. Does his skill in filmmaking just drop off whenever the movie he's making has a title longer than 1 or 2 words? Sorry, that's getting into a bit of unserious territory. Back on topic, which is that pulling from reality is the secret to making richer stories, I'd like to take something from The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 7, which I consider one of the best episodes of the show. This scene with Miggs Mayfeld, played by Bill Burr, talking with his former CEO, played by Richard Brake, and of course Pedro Pascal in only his second unmasked scene of The Mandalorian. The episode was written by Rick Famuyiwa, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, which you could consider a redemption arc considering the last episode he wrote was the first Mayfeld episode, and
this nigga is trash!
That's widely considered one of the worst episodes of Season 1. Boy, we didn't know how good we had it back then. In this scene, Miggs is having a bit of a chat with his former CEO, who left tons of people to die in an event called Operation Cinder. Mayfeld was stationed in Burnin Khan, a mining colony at the periphery of the Empire, which was shelled from orbit. Evidently, seeing as the CEO was reassigned to this Rhydo mining planet, he was shifted from one mine to another. Anyways, Mayfeld brings up all the dead people, not just civilians, but loyal Imperial soldiers, all shelled with no regard or distinction made on the orders of a man who is comfortably shifted from one position of power to another, all while assuaging his own ego by saying it was for the greater good. This might sound familiar to you, it might not, but it certainly sounded familiar to a couple of Iraq War veterans who called Bill Burr on his podcast to commend him for the way that he played Mayfeld. Importantly, one of them asked him how he was able to portray that character, and there's something really important Burr said that I think really summons up my idea here.
How did I connect with pain. That's all I can tell you. So even though I didn't experience that specific pain, I am able to tap into other shit that happened to me. I just sort of clock those things, stick it in the memory bank, and then when you come up with a scene like that, you have options so it won't be, like, hopefully stale.
Like I've been talking about from this video, pulling from reality is what he did here. He pulled from not his own experience, but the experience of a person who lived through pain and expressed it through aggression. And because what he was pulling from was something real, it made a connection with people who resonated with that pain. So I'll leave you with that. It's a difficult thing to keep every little thing socked away in your head, but it's what the best writers do, and they use those little reflections of reality to build a story that reflects the reader's own reality back at them. In my opinion, that's the key to making writing that people feel has a soul to it. It's what Star Wars needs to do if they want to get out of the death spiral. Once again...
Oh shit, here we go again.
If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. What other inspirations would you want Star Wars to draw from? Comment your thoughts down below. Until next time, and we'll see each other again when I swing into August.